Medical information on this site is provided as an information resource only and is not to be used or relied on for any diagnostic or treatment purposes. This information does not create any patient-physician relationship and should not be used as a substitute for professional diagnosis and treatment. Please consult your healthcare provider before making any healthcare decisions or for guidance about a specific medical condition. Doctors Ruhoy and Kaufman shall have no liability for any damages, loss, injury, or liability whatsoever suffered as a result of your reliance on the information contained in this site. Hi there, and welcome back to Unraveled. I'm David Kaufman. I'm here with Eileen Ruhoy. You can say your last name. That's okay.
If you don't know by now who I am,
So
how could you not?
This is going to be a different kind of episode. I think we've made it clear that we actually don't rehearse or plan much. We basically text each other the night before and say, what should we talk about? Oh my God. And which we did last night. And just now we were saying, what are we going to talk about? Because we hadn't made a decision. So here's what we've decided. Both of us have been on other doctors' podcasts, and both of us realized that those podcast moderators, whatever, I don't know what you call the other doctor, always start by saying, tell me about your life. How did you get to where you're at? Give me some background. And we realized that we've never done that. We've never really said, who the hell is Kaufman and who the hell is Ruhoy?
Right.
And how did we get to this bizarre situation of in this studio with these lights and stuff? So I think we're going to try this. I don't know how it's going to work, but it'll be interesting.
I think I know most of your story, but maybe there's some things I don't know about you.
Yeah.
And there are things you don't know about me.
All right. Well, I think that as a question, it's what I would say is how did I and how did you get into medicine, right? Medicine doesn't, there's always people that say, oh, I knew I wanted to be a doctor since I was 4 years old. I'm not sure I believe that.
I didn't even think I was going to get to college, much less medical school growing up.
Right. Well, I actually did want to go to be a doctor in late, like 9th grade, 10th grade, I started thinking about it, which is a long time ago, okay? And I need to disclose that because what I'm going to explain is related to the times, okay? So I'm a product of the 60s. Jesus Christ. And for me, when I went to college at NYU, I was planning to do pre-med, but instead I was marching in the streets. This was the Vietnam War.
Just brought tears to my eyes. Like, no, seriously, like you were part of a generation that tried to change the world.
Right. So it was civil rights era and the Vietnam era. Everything that Trump's trying to destroy is what we were doing then to try to change the world. I just felt I couldn't do pre-med. I couldn't commit to that level of study when I had these strong feelings and wanted to participate. And so I literally was marching in the streets. I went to Washington. I sat in the Pentagon steps. I did all that crazy stuff. And only cut back or withdrew, I don't know how many people know the history of those years, but when there was SDS, Students Democratic Society, and then there was a spin-off called the Weathermen, I think came from Dylan's song, and they became increasingly violent. And they started blowing up buildings and actually blew up, not intentionally, they were building bombs that blew up in their face and killed a bunch of them on 11th Street in the Village, which is where I was living. Not on 11th Street, but I was nearby. And that was like, oh my God, I can't, I feel strongly, but not strongly enough to go around dropping bombs and killing people. So I really pulled out. And by then, I was just finishing, I was probably a junior, and I had transferred to the film school of NYU. Don't ask me why I did that. I can't believe my parents let me do that. Still, I'm amazed by that. I really admire them and thank them for it, but I'm not sure how I would have felt if one of my kids said, all right, I'm going to go off to film school, and they'd never talked about that in their life. So I did film school, and it was great. I had a great time. And then I worked in the film industry in New York for 3 or 4 years. And then I got tired of that. I'm monopolizing this, but I'll try to speed it up. I got tired of that. And my wife was a teacher at the time, so I thought, well, I really love kids and I love teaching. So I went to Columbia and got a graduate degree in education at Teachers College. So film school kind of like faded. My BFA faded into the past. And then I was teaching at Teachers College Lab School, which I totally loved. But then they changed directors, and I totally hated that director, so I quit. And then I was teaching in East Harlem in Manhattan to, very poor people, but in a parent cooperative school. So it was very cool. Here, you have this very disadvantaged population and these kids teaching in a school that the parents are trying to run and fund and everything else. And I was in a basement with no windows with these kids. It was great, except I couldn't really teach anything because the kids were always sick. Always sick. Their health was horrible. And that somehow, and this may sound false, but it's true, kind of got me back into the idea, well, maybe I do want to be a doctor, because that's what I was doing.
Yeah.
And then I ultimately had to go back to college and do all the pre-med courses in 2 years, which was the hardest thing. Medical school was easy compared to the pre-med for me. And then I went on.
Yeah, but okay, so you got to medical school, and then what? So...
Well, actually, let me add one more piece. So here I am. I'm this teacher, and I'm really loving it, but I'm thinking about medicine, and I feel like I can't do it. And we used to go to Vermont. So we're in Vermont for the it was either late spring, and I have this incredibly distinct memory of driving back to Manhattan, pulling over, excuse me, into a view spot, on one of the parkways, I forget, and sitting on the hood of the car saying, I'm going to make this decision now, I got to decide.
Oh, wow.
And made the decision to, yes, I'm going to go pre-med and do medicine.
Wow.
Yeah, it was pretty amazing.
And you haven't looked back since?
No, I've had no regrets at all. No, I love it.
Do you ever think about, when you go to the movies, do you think about like the film industry and
Yeah, sometimes. There's a funny story there.
Oh, yeah?
So I did, for a young person, did really well, kind of moved up the ladder fast. And right at the time that I was trying to make this decision, I had applied for a job with a feature film. I had been doing educational films and industrial films, the sort of bread and butter stuff. And I applied for this job for a feature film, and I didn't know anything about it. And I went for the interview, and I didn't really know the guy, the director. And then I just contacted him and said, I've changed my mind. I'm not going to do it. Turns out it was Rocky 1.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So I would have ended up like a production manager or something on Rocky. And clearly, if I had done that, I would never have left. My whole life would have been completely transformed.
You'd be living with Sylvester Stallone right now.
Yeah, exactly.
On his compound.
Yeah, it's such a funny story.
Wow. Well, you've had some career, and then you med school and then residency, and then you got out of residency, and then you just all of a sudden were like thrust into the HIV.
Yeah, well, I was at St. Vincent's, which was in Lower Manhattan, the Village, on 12th Street and 7th Avenue, an epicenter of what would become the HIV epidemic. A major area of gay people living there and everything else. So yeah, I didn't learn anything about HIV in training or medical school for that matter. Yeah. Or anything about the variety of infections or T cells, CD4. What's a CD4? Nobody told me about that. And then true again, my second patient was HIV positive. I didn't know that. He was a very sick guy. And subsequently I had patient after patient. And the next 15 years were, totally focused on these patients. I mean, I saw non-HIV, but it was almost all HIV. I'd say 80% of my time was HIV disease. And, those were very grim times. I would have 10 to 15 patients a day in the hospital to make rounds on, all basically in the process of dying or trying to slow that down from opportunistic infections. And I had about 10 patients a month that died. And these are guys mostly in the beginning who were young, 25 to 45 years old. It was horrible.
I can't even imagine.
Yeah, it was amazing.
I remember those years. There was so much fear mongering.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was scary years, and you were just thrust right in the
But I
middle
learned
of it.
so much.
Right.
And the patients were extraordinary.
Yeah.
Just extraordinary. I
And I'm sure you think about them still,
Oh yeah.
and then you apply what you learned in working with them to the patients that you work with today.
Right, right. I think that's what made, for me, this transition to complex illness, ME/CFS, long COVID, easy and challenging and interesting, is because for those 15 years, we were making it up as we went along. Nobody was helping us. You got to remember that the first 5 years or so, the government didn't exist. Reagan was saying, "Oh, this is terrible. We're not giving you money for this."
Yeah.
And even, unfortunately, many of my colleagues, even at St. Vincent's, they didn't really want to get involved. Initially, I had to plead with surgeons. We knew there were one or two surgeons that would take care of our patients. Usually, they were surgeons that were gay, even if they didn't make it public.
Mm-hmm.
Infectious disease doctors, I hate to say it, in the beginning, they didn't want any part of this. So it was up to us. And then we're about 25 Manhattan docs seeing these patients, and we would meet once a month and discuss patients and talk about things we tried, things to consider, and constantly back and forth in between. And no internet. It's really important to understand.
Yeah.
There was no internet. I couldn't do what I do now. You tell me GLP-1 receptor, I can go on and find out about it. I couldn't do that then. It was all kind of word of mouth and then literally library stuff.
Right. Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, Steve and I were just talking about that last night. We used to have to go to like the libraries and like look up a book, and you would have to try to find the answer to something, and it was very hard to do. You had those index cards that tried to help you find where a book would be found, to look up a particular question that you might have had, and oftentimes you couldn't find the answer to that question. I mean, it was really hard. It would take hours.
Oh yeah, it was a whole
to learn.
I mean, that's part of the reason I get very frustrated now.
Because they don't know how easy
primary
they have
care
it.
doctors
I know.
who say, "Well, I don't know how to use LDN," and I want to say, "Come on, wake the hell up! All you do is
Google.
go LDN."
Especially now with AI.
Yeah,
right?
and
My
you
God,
learn
how much
everything in a minute.
easier.
I mean, I did a search. I just was telling you before we started. I did a search on Perplexity, which is an AI last night on GLP-1s and a specific medical problem. Okay, not off-label, not an indication for the drug. First of all, it was amazing to watch it develop the answer. And I would say in 60 to 90 seconds, it produced a search of the literature for this not indicated use.
Yeah, right.
Complete with all of the data, and then it summarizes it and comes to conclusions. That would have taken me 6 months to do.
With the references,
Yeah,
by the way.
yeah,
it's
and
not
all the
like
references.
some random conclusion.
So I think sometimes I think patients and doctors don't realize how unbelievably useful the internet is for this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, the days before the internet, like I don't even know how we survived.
So I don't know how I did it. That's the point. How was I able to even do this stuff then?
Yeah, I remember the internet. I think I was in my second year of med school when I finally had an email account, and I was like, "Oh, what's this?" And it was those computers. It was like the big computers with the black screen and the blocked white letters. You remember those?
Right.
That was the early days of email. And I remember, and it was an inter-school email. Like I could only email, people in my medical school. It was very, very weird. But that was the first email thing that I had. But before then, I mean, I had no access to really anything that was cyberspace like. Although I think obviously computers already existed, but in a very primitive form, not like what we have today, which is just crazy.
Right.
Yeah, I'm always shocked at the technology and how it just.
It's incredible, and I think the AI is just getting started.
Yeah,
it's going to be incredible.
It's going to change a lot of different professions, frankly.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, so my story. I think you know most of my story because I come to you a lot to complain. But yeah, Brooklyn, New York, 70s. And so, yeah, I honestly didn't think I'd go to college, much less medical school, because my family was so dysfunctional. But I obviously did and made my way through. And sometimes I look back and I just don't even know. Sometimes I don't know the answer of like how I got here. I don't know if I'm supposed to be here. Sometimes I think I'm supposed to be somewhere else, but then something will happen that makes me go, oh, no, this is where I'm supposed to be. And it's just when I think back, I just think, I don't remember ever first thinking that I wanted to be a doctor, though my mother did recently remind me that in the third grade I won the spelling bee. And so there was a New York Post. Remember that mag? Or it's
still there.
Exists, yeah. There was a
very
New York
Trump
Post
heavy, but still there.
article where they came and interviewed me, and the reporter apparently asked me what I wanted to be when I grew up, and I said a doctor. And the reason why she remembered that was because I had clipped out that article and included it in my medical school application.
Good for you. Smart.
I'm such a nerd.
No, that
But
was good.
to show that I've always
Yeah.
wanted to be a doctor, though I don't have memory of that. It's funny. So clearly I maybe had thought that I wanted to be a doctor. I wanted to help people. So I just, went through school and then decided to go to college because everyone else was. I honestly, I didn't have aspirations
So
for anything.
what was it in the third grade that made you say that?
I don't know. I think that's what. So where I lived and went to school, there was a lot of, I was. It was a very affluent kind of area. Even though my family wasn't affluent, but that was sort of the surrounding
Well,
areas.
it's also the Jewish thing.
Exactly. It was a lot
Doctor,
of
lawyer,
Jewish
accountant.
neighborhood, right? So I guess a lot of my friends were talking about going to medical school and going to law school and all that stuff, and so I think I just said I want to be a doctor because my friends were saying, and I was in the third grade. I mean, I don't know. What do you say in the third grade?
Yeah. Actually, I remember. I'm asking you the question because it suddenly occurred to me that I remember when I initially thought, "Oh, I want to be a doctor." I was probably. This is before when I said 9th and 10th grade, so younger. I think I was probably 12, and my grandfather became increasingly disabled. He had trouble walking, and he would walk like a stick figure, like jerky, and it was really pretty terrifying to watch, really terrifying. And I have this memory of him. This is probably 1960 or 59. Okay, so we know so much more now than we knew then.
Yeah.
Okay, and you'll see why I'm saying that in a second. So, and I have this memory of him walking down the driveway with my father helping him. That was his fault, that he was his father, and getting into the car and driving off. And they were driving into New York to see a doctor because nothing had helped. He'd been to a lot of doctors. Okay, he was an orthodontist, so he knew people in the city. So, and then he came back and he started treatment, and he got completely better.
Wow.
Diagnosis: vitamin B12 deficiency. It was like, oh my God, look at this. This man was dying in front of my eyes, and all he needed was a couple of B12 shots. And it just blew me away that kind of thing could happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's amazing.
Oh, that is amazing. Yes, some things are very simply remedied.
And I put that
They
in my
have to be-
medical school application. That's
You
what
did?
reminded me of it.
Oh, I wondered, did the interview, when you had your interviews for medical school, did they bring up that story?
Yeah.
Yeah, because my interviews, they brought up my article that I included. And I had, one of the stories that I had put into my application, where I had to write, did you write essays for your
Yeah,
application?
of course.
Yeah, so in my essay, I wrote about a memory that I had. My father left my family when I was very, very young, me and my younger sister, and didn't give my mother any money. And so she was actually on welfare. And one of my memories that I have was one night, it was very late at night, there was no more milk or eggs in the house. Not that I eat that anymore, but my mother had to bundle. I was like 6, my sister was 3. May she rest in peace. But I'm going to cry. But my mother, my mother had to bundle. It was a cold New York night, and there was a lot of snow outside. So she had to bundle me and my sister in, we were like in those snowmen
right.
suits, those like ski suits. And she had to walk to the local market, which they don't exist any longer. These like neighborhood grocery stores.
Sure.
But so the neighborhood grocery store to go pick up milk and eggs. And I remember her pulling out like food stamps. And I remember a memory going, that's not cash, because I knew what cash looked like at that point. But I was like, but I didn't know what they were. So I thought that's just the way she pays for milk and eggs. And so anyway, but it was like 9 o'clock at night, but she had no one to watch us. And my father was gone. And so, and I wrote that memory in my essay. And so my interviewers brought up that story to me more than the story of the article that I clipped and pasted into my application about the spelling bee and me wanting to be a doctor in the 3rd grade. But I often talked about in the interviews that I went through. Actually, I had 4 interviews for my medical school that I ended up attending, and 3 of them brought up that story. And so I sort of told about my early life, which is really, as I said earlier, my family was incredibly dysfunctional. And so I have this memory, and I just, I just think about how my mother just did the best she could,
Yeah.
and and she had to drag these two little girls out in the middle of the night on a cold, snowy Brooklyn, New York night to go get milk, and it just made me sad, and so then I felt like I wanted to, like, pay back the favor,
Right.
and I knew that it would make my mother happy that I became a doctor, and so I became, then I sort of decided that that's why I was becoming a doctor in those conversations during my interviews, and I realized like that was a very pivotal like memory of my life, and just recognizing like how my mother just sort of was stuck with two little kids and she had to figure it out, and she actually did really well in the end in terms of, she got a job and she did really well at that job and she rose the ranks and so on, and so now when I think back, of course, I get upset with myself that I get so frustrated. But so I think that that's just one of those memories, that they call them, now it's like this trend, what changes your brain chemistry, like memories that change your brain,
Right.
something that changes your brain chemistry. And I think those are the kind of memories that do that, like, so
Yeah.
the
No,
ones
I
that you're
agree.
saying and the
I
ones that
agree.
I'm referring to. And so I went to medical school and got out of medical school, and I don't know, I found since that time, like, my path has not been, my path has always been circuitous, right? I never was like college, medical school, residency, like that just wasn't my life. It was
Oh,
like,
like me. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. It was like do different things in between each one
Yeah.
of
In
these.
medical school, I was called a retread.
A what?
Retread.
Retread.
Yeah, they called older medical students retread, like tires that get retreaded, like truck tires.
Yeah.
So
I,
I know. Well, this is the 70s, okay? I graduated in 77, so we're talking long ago. And most people did what you and I didn't do. They go to high school, college, medical
right.
school, residency.
That's
So
exactly
I
right.
didn't do any of that.
That's
I
the
was
usual
out of
path.
a lot of years. I just went through that. And so we were retreads. But what was cool, the medical school I went to actually welcomed older students.
Oh.
And I lived in Manhattan at the time, so I commuted to the school, which was in Westchester. And in my car pool for this commuting were three other medical students,
Retreads?
three other retreads. One was a rock star, rock singer, with a band called The Left Something. And I still see his name on Doximity, so I know he's out there practicing. He's a
Okay.
psychiatrist. Another was oh God, what did she do? I can't remember what she did, but now she's a GI doc. And then the third was a PhD literature person, and she is, I don't know what she does now. But it was really amazing. There were 4
Wow.
retreads in this car.
Wow. Retread. I never heard that term.
I never heard it either till I was
I wonder
called
if they were
one.
calling me a retread behind my back.
So I have a question for you. How did you decide to become a neurologist?
I've always been fascinated with the brain. And when I hit neuroscience in medical school, I was like, oh, this is what I want to do. And frankly, before I went to medical school, I did do research in brain trauma. And I worked with some phenomenal neurosurgeons at New York Hospital, at Cornell Weill in the Upper East Side of New York. In fact, one of the neurosurgeons was the Central Park jogger neurosurgeon.
Oh,
Remember that
wow.
whole
Yeah,
case?
sure.
Yeah. I remember coming into the work one morning and like all of the the news outlets were there because they were going to interview him. So I learned a tremendous amount from these neurosurgeons, and then I thought I'm going to go into neurosurgery. But at that point, like I felt like I wanted to get on with it's a long residency, as you know. So I felt, although I ended up doing a PhD, and I thought I could have spent all those years just doing a neurosurgery residency. But anyway, I think it worked out okay. So I just went to neurology instead, and I still sometimes sort of wonder about that choice, because sometimes when I even talk to the neurosurgeons that I work with, I think, wow, you get to operate on this like this fascinating neuroanatomy that I only get to like see on imaging and like talk about with patients, about what's involved, but they actually get to like touch it, and manipulate it.
Yeah, I know.
And visualize it. Like, I love that, and sometimes I feel a little sense of like envy that I wish I could be doing that on a regular basis.
Yeah.
But anyway, but I chose neurology as because I didn't want to do the full neurosurgery residency, so that's why. And then I just feel like everything is neurological. Like there's, it has tendrils throughout.
Well, everything is certainly nerves. That's for sure.
Exactly. So I really feel like I can make an impact with patients. And I mean, I think most people know this story already, but then, I at some point, about 10 years ago, I just wasn't feeling well, and long story short, I kept going to doctors. I was seeing colleagues. No, everyone was like, "Oh, you're just working too hard. You're just stressed. You're anxious. You're perimenopausal."
You're just a woman.
I'm just a woman. They might have, you know what? I would have had more respect if they would have just said that to my
But
face.
I'm being serious when I
Yeah,
say
no, I
that, yeah.
know. They should have just said that, you know? But anyway, and I spent a year trying to get someone to believe me. And then I finally cried to an internist acquaintance of mine. And I said, please order me an MRI because you can't order one. People always ask me that. Why don't you just order an MRI? Because you can't. We weren't allowed. My insurance at least wouldn't allow me to
Yeah.
because, they like a ordering provider, as they call it, as you know. And so I begged, and every time I asked a colleague or another specialist that I had seen to order it, they would give me reasons why they wouldn't. They didn't want
It's
to
mind-boggling.
contribute.
I mean, that
I know
that
it
happens
is, but
now.
it
I'm sorry to
happened.
interrupt you,
No,
but that
don't.
happens now with my patients.
Yeah.
And and sometimes I just can't control myself. And
Really?
I'll say,
You?
I'll say, why would that doctor care?
Right.
They're not paying for it.
Right.
They're not out there to save money for insurance. What possible reason could they have to refuse? Because that's
Yeah.
the line. I refuse to order that MRI of your neck.
Yeah.
Mind.
It happens
Blank
all the
boggling.
time. And I'm
Yes.
shocked at some of the stories that some of the
Yeah,
patients tell us.
sorry, I
about it.
stopped
No,
you.
don't be sorry. I mean, but yeah, that's what happened. I would hear things like they didn't want to contribute to my hysteria. Like
Oh,
that was my favorite
God.
line. And that I don't need it. My exam was normal, like all that bullshit, and I was like, okay, whatever. And so anyway, so I cried to an internist and she said, and that's a famous line that I've said before, but like when a neurologist asks you to order a brain MRI, you order a brain MRI. So she did. And I came out of that machine and they sent me right to the ER, of course, and then the rest is sort of history, as I think most people know the story. But what I realized was like, wow, like, and if it wasn't for that year, like I would probably not be like still dealing with it.
Right.
But that year led that tumor to sort of grow. And it went into the brain tissue and sort of got stuck there and is now like along the meninges. And, I think if someone would have listened to me early on, I mean, obviously I can never prove this because I don't really know. But,
Well, you can't prove it, but it grows. So if it was
grows.
found
It grew.
earlier,
It was 7
then it would have been
centimeters.
smaller.
I mean, I should show you the pictures of my initial MRI.
Yeah.
The left side of my brain was on my right because of this tumor and all the edema around it. And so, it's called mass effect. It pushed everything over, and it was pushing downward, which is actually very dangerous. So, which is why I was not feeling well. And in retrospect, and even after all this happened, a lot of my neurology colleagues at the hospital were saying, "Wow, you must have like incredible neurons," because I didn't have seizures. Although in retrospect, I think I was having focal seizures. I didn't recognize them as such because I didn't want to believe it, I guess. But I didn't have any generalized tonic-clonic for sure, and I had a normal exam.
Yeah.
But if you looked at my MRI, you would say, "There's no way your exam was normal," but it was. I mean, that part I really do agree with. I had a normal exam, which is why no one wanted to order the MRI. So anyway, I really feel like if someone would have listened to me early on, and I thought to myself, like, wow, I will never, if I can control it, I will never allow this to happen to another
Right.
person.
I was just going to say, there's
Yeah.
very important parallels here. I'm going to ramble for a second.
That's okay. Ramble.
Number one, I think one of the reasons you're so good at what you do is because you were gaslit. You experienced what our patients experience constantly. You went to doctors who said, "Oh, get out of here. You're just depressed or anxious or overworked or stressed."
Mm-hmm.
And then you had a terrible illness, which you are still dealing with, and that creates a level of compassion and insight as a physician that allows you to be the kind of doctor you are with your patients. So I'm not saying it's good this happened, obviously,
No,
but
I understand
but
what
it's
you're
a really
saying.
important
Yeah.
lesson to, piece of information to understand about what creates doctors like you.
Right. I appreciate you saying that. And I like to believe that to be true. I think sometimes I have like severe imposter syndrome, which I think a lot of females in any profession sort of deal with, because somehow you sort of, at least in my generation, like it was always male dominated everything. Like most occupations that we would even consider were male dominated, and so you end up sort of feeling like, are you as good as the males in your field kind of thing. And so, but I sort of doubled down on it when I started seeing patients in our chronic and complex illness world, and I started to sort of hear their stories when they would see other doctors. I thought, oh, fuck this, like I'm going to just believe my value, believe my worth, believe that I bring something to the table and just help these people because they deserve
Right.
it. And the other thing is that I think that the healthcare and we talk about this all the time. The healthcare system is also just broken. I do think that there's a lot of doctors out there that would do a better job if they had more time,
Yeah.
because you can't get the essence of the patient in 20 minutes. You just can't. I
Well, that's the
don't.
other thing I wanted to say about your story. Thank you. That no, no.
You're welcome.
That another aspect of it that is painfully revealing and critically important is you had a normal exam, you looked good, your labs were fine, but you were giving a history that was not fine, and the doctors were not listening to that and not taking a deep enough history and not
Right.
accepting that you can look well, have normal labs, have a normal exam, but
Mhm.
still be sick as shit.
Right.
And that is what our patients experience day after day after day.
100% agree. And that's why I just sort of swore that I'm just not going to, if I could help it, I'm not going to let another patient feel that way.
Right.
And so I always believe everything they say,
Yeah,
until if they
exactly.
give me reason not to, then, but I will say that in all the years that I've been doing this, I don't think any patient has given me reason not to believe them.
I agree.
Right. So you just, and then, then you end up doing a lot of medicine that is sort of not considered conventional
Yeah.
and outside the box thinking, and maybe ordering a lot of labs, which a lot of times I get asked by other doctors, like, why do you order so many labs?
Yeah.
And so, and so there are days that I feel like I'm constantly defending like what we do, and what other doctors in our world do,
Right.
and why we do it, and what we know and what we found, and what I believe to be true. And at some points I get tired of defending the kind of work that we do, and I just sort of say, well, I'm just going to do it. I don't care if you agree with it or not, kind of thing. But
Right.
it's really about the patients in the end. So, yeah, and I'm just happy where I ended up. Frankly, I now believe that I'm meant to be here, and that was sort of the whole point of my journey.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
I feel that way. I mean, I feel like the HIV years taught me so much. Yeah, everything we did then was off-label, just like now. I think that's why I could dive in, as I mentioned before.
Yeah.
And I would see patients with infections that I'd never heard of. No teaching, and I'd have to learn that, and I'd have to figure out ways to treat it, and the fact that I didn't know it, hadn't learned it, hadn't been taught it, didn't mean I couldn't do something about it and try to do something about it. And that was,
Right.
that's what
That's a
made
great
me
way of
into
saying
what
it,
I
by the
am,
way.
so to
Yeah.
speak, And that's exactly what happened when I fell into the MECFS world. I mean, it's not like I chose that. It just kind of happened.
I think because you had that open-mindedness, and when I first met you, or when you attacked me at that
Right.
Denver meeting, but my first conversation with you, it was so clear that, one, that you were highly intelligent, and that, two, you were very caring, and that, three, you were just open-minded. And that, I think, and curious, right? And those are the qualities that make a really great doctor.
Yeah, thank you.
And that's why I was so, when you said that you were moving to Seattle, I was so excited about that. And of course, you moved in the beginning of the pandemic.
Right, the day it started, or it was noticed anyhow.
We weren't allowed on the streets.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, it's just nice to know you and nice to work with you. And I've learned so much from you, even just, my God, like just working with you and some of the other doctors of our group, like just my mind has just been so opened, from things that I would never have come across, certainly in neurology, and that just sort of changes sort of the flavor of the kind of medicine that I do. And like I said, when during our live, when I was trying to respond to that question about my recent change of model, which is just that I believe it's the reason why I haven't burnt out. I believe it's the reason why I'm still excited to do the work, because every day I feel like is something new. Every day I learn something new, or a different patient tells me something different that makes me think something different. And I think that has sort of kept me going in medicine, and allowed me to burn out like so many of my colleagues have.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, when I talk to younger doctors or, employed physicians, they're so, if they're not, burnt out might not even be the right word. They're just bored. They're just unhappy.
They're bored.
They're
Yeah.
very unhappy.
Yeah.
And they feel stuck. They already have $100,000, $250,000 debt. They often by then have a family with 1, 2, 3 kids, and they don't know what to do. And
Right.
it just kills me, because they could just leave and do what we're doing, and they could make a fine living, and they would be excited every day. I mean, there's only, for me, excuse me, this is a very emotional episode. um, I love what I'm doing and I want to keep doing it. The only thing that makes me say, oh, I've had it, I'm quitting, is the insurance
I
issue
know.
and the healthcare system issue. If it weren't for that, I would never have a negative thought about what I do because it's always interesting.
Yeah.
The before this episode, we recorded the GLP-1 episode.
Mhm.
That's such a perfect example. Here, it's like it explodes my head to find something new and learn it and then see it work all in 1 week, so to speak, just
Yeah.
time compressed. And that's very exciting. And, being able to try to help and figure this out is incredible.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. The insurance,
Yeah,
that's another episode.
Well, I think we've done it. I think people are sick of us talking about
Sick of
it.
us complaining about insurance.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think someone had made a comment somewhere that like every occupation has like administrative hell, component to it, which I'm sure to some extent is true. But when you're just trying to get something accomplished for a patient and there's just these barriers in the way, it's really hard because we're talking about human lives and, as doctors, all we want to be is therapeutic. And when an insurance company steps in the way and goes, no, you are not going to be able to help this patient, like it's really frustrating. It's like,
Well, and I think it's worth commenting that negative stuff is part of the reason that you make the changes in your practice that you made and the changes I make. I made a bunch of changes that patients were very angry and frustrated and upset about.
Yeah.
In terms of moving a population of patients on, meaning out of my practice, specifically so I could get more new patients because I was so overwhelmed by the need and not seeing, I couldn't get other doctors to do this. I still can't, okay? But I've made other compromises, which I don't feel good about, but it's either that or I quit. So for
Right.
example, I have a new rule. I'm not doing any more prior auths for medications. I'm just
Yeah.
not going to do it. I've had it. It's just been too infuriating, and it's not, if you want me to keep working, then I'm going to stop doing that, and that's the
Right.
decision I made. And another one, which I feel badly about, and I'm sure I'll get shit from patients for this, is I'm no longer going to do disability forms for new patients. It's torture.
Yeah.
It is torture. Not the paperwork, not filling in those stupid little APS things. It's helping a bedbound, severely disabled, 100% homebound patient get disability, and I speak to some peer-to-peer on the phone who doesn't know shit about it and won't listen. And I just it's too upsetting. I get off that phone and I'm
Yeah, I know.
literally pounding my table.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
No,
So that's why I've stopped.
Right. I get emotionally invested
Yeah.
in this stuff, and you're right.
So-
It's not healthy.
Right. So it's either that or I quit.
Right.
So I still don't want to quit. So.
Right. I know you, and you can't.
I know, but these are the
No.
changes we need to make. And
I agree.
it is important that the patient population understands that. It's not just that, oh, he's a lazy piece of shit. He doesn't want to do disability forms and PAs. Sorry. But
Who's saying you're lazy? People?
no, I'm saying what they may say.
You are anything but lazy.
All right.
I can attest to that. But yeah, I mean, I agree. Those barriers and
YouTube
obstacles.
is going to
and-
ban this episode because of our language.
Well, I think we have to. When you post it, do you say yes for kids or no for kids?
No for kids.
Okay.
Yeah, always.
But then are the comments still on if you do no for kids?
Yeah, comments are coming in.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't know if kids are commenting.
We still don't understand YouTube all that well. We're still trying to figure it out. I agree. And we've definitely complained about insurance many times before. But I think that the love of medicine and the love of my patients, I really do consider them like part of my world,
Yep.
and, I mean, I want to say family because I really do feel that way, but they are definitely part of my world, and I don't want to leave them, and I don't want them to leave me ever. But I want to get them better. I'm very vested in it, and
No, me
vested about
too. I
learning
mean,
it.
you and I talk about our personal reactions to patients'
Yeah.
success stories.
Yeah.
So, again, in the episode before this, I described a patient visit yesterday and their response to GLP-1. I literally was tearing. I mean, I had to
Yeah.
excuse myself for a minute from the appointment
Oh,
because I was like,
yeah. No, I
No,
totally know
it's just
that
how
emotion.
you feel.
Yeah, and it's almost like you feel like you're not. Is it professional to cry with a patient? Like I don't even know sometimes.
Yeah.
But sometimes I agree with you. There are times that I get very teary when I'm talking to a patient who's telling me about how much better they've been feeling because of some interventions that we did. And I never take full credit. I mean, they did it. I recommend stuff, and some patients try it, some patients don't. And so I get very teary, and then I wonder, is this professional? Like, am I just like some weirdo doctor who's like crying with
That's
patients?
about how I feel.
And then sometimes I get emotional over patients that I had seen before I knew before I knew what I know today. And I'm like, oh my God, that's what was going on with that patient that I
Right.
saw 15 years ago.
Right.
That's what was happening with that patient. And I wish I could like call them all up and say, you have to come back, and I know what's happening, and I know I could fix you, but who knows? I don't remember their names. Like, I don't know how to contact them. But anyway, I have those emotions too sometimes. Patients just flood my brain. I'm like, oh my God, that patient, that was what was happening. So anyway, yeah, it's just it's a great profession. I'm proud to be part of it. I get very upset when I hear of other experiences that patients have with other doctors sometimes. But then I also get mad respect for some of the doctors who have really taken care of my patients, who are curious and are listening and are trying to be helpful, and even will reach out to me and say, like, what can I do to help? And so I really appreciate that, and that makes me feel like we're making a difference.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree.
Yeah, and ultimately we just want to have an impact, right?
Yeah, and get people better.
Yeah, before we
go.
Before we keel over.
Before we pass on. Transition, whatever
Whatever
the latest
to a new world.
Politically correct word to say you die.
Before we, what is spontaneous combustion?
Right.
Like, one day I won't be here anymore. Right?
Discorporate.
Don't you sort of discover?
No, I was
wait.
I was rereading
This
tread, right? No, but they're gonna think I'm nuts. I was just rereading a favorite junior high school book called Stranger in a Strange Land.
Oh yeah.
By Robert Heinlein, a science fiction book.
Yeah.
Which I loved.
Yeah.
Then I couldn't finish it. First of all, now it just doesn't work now. But it just the language, the writing, it just wasn't what it was then. I wasn't. I'm different. It's me, not him. But in that book, the human that grew up on Mars talks about how they discorporate for
discorporate.
Dying. Yeah.
Yes, I was going to say that's where you got the discorporate from.
Talk
I just
about
realized
random
that. Yeah, as you
here.
were saying that. I remember the story. Yeah, so before we discorporate.
Right.
Exactly.
We're really ranging widely here today.
I hope you got a better sense of like who we are.
Yeah.
As humans and as people and as doctors, I guess. It's just it's a valuable profession. I'm proud to be part of it.
Oh, it's great. I just wish we could get more doctors in doing this work.
Yeah.
It's just such good work.
It really is. All right, we're out of time. Any last words of wisdom? I know I'm exhausted. I want a nap.
It's a little bit more emotional than I expected.
Well, I think when you think back on your life, like, when you think back on your journey, I mean, and I even talk about this with patients sometimes, because I always say, at some point you'll be better, and then you'll think back on this journey, and there'll be a sense of mourning of the life that you thought you would have that you didn't have, right? Because of these years of sickness. So, and I think that certainly I experienced that, and I think in some different ways you sort of were experiencing that emotion as well, of just sort of what your life has meant and how it could have gone differently and had been different. Like you said, if you had worked on Rocky,
right?
Like,
Can you imagine Rocky? My God, that would have been really something.
My daughter lives in Philadelphia, as you know, so when I go visit her, I
run up the stairs.
All right.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Please subscribe.
Yes.
Please tell your friends, your doctors, families to watch.
People on the street.
Yeah. Randomly distribute YouTube clips. All right. Well, thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye.